The rain hammered the cracked pavement of downtown Chicago as Marcus Thompson hurried through the dimly lit streets, his worn leather jacket providing little protection against the October storm. At 32, he carried the weight of the world on his shoulders, evident in the deep lines around his eyes and the way he constantly checked his phone for updates from his daughter's babysitter. Tonight's double shift at the diner had ended later than expected, and 8-year-old Emma would be wondering where her daddy was. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. As he turned the corner onto Maple Street, Marcus heard something that made his blood run cold. A woman's terrified scream cut through the sound of rainfall, followed by harsh male voices, demanding she hand over her purse. Without hesitation, Marcus broke into a sprint toward the commotion, his construction boots splashing through puddles as he raced to help. What he saw made his heart pound with adrenaline. 2 men in dark hoodies had cornered a well-dressed woman against a brick wall outside the old courthouse. She clutched her briefcase and purse tightly, her designer heels making it impossible for her to run. The larger of the 2 attackers was reaching for her belongings while his companion kept watch. "Hey," Marcus shouted, his voice booming across the empty street. "Leave her alone." The muggers turned, sizing up this unexpected interruption. Marcus wasn't the biggest guy they'd ever seen, but there was something in his stance, something in the way he approached without fear, that made them hesitate. Years of construction work had built solid muscle, and more importantly, being a single father had given him a fierce protective instinct that extended far beyond his own child. "Walk away, man," the larger mugger warned, pulling out a knife that glinted in the streetlight. "This ain't your problem." "Actually, it is," Marcus replied calmly, positioning himself between the attackers and the woman. "You've got about 10 seconds to disappear before I make this everyone's problem." The tension stretched like a taut wire. The woman behind him was breathing heavily, clearly terrified, but trying to stay calm. Marcus could sense her fear, and it only strengthened his resolve. These predators had picked the wrong night and definitely the wrong witness. The first attacker lunged with the knife, but Marcus was ready. Years of working construction sites had taught him to anticipate danger and react quickly. He sidestepped the blade and delivered a solid punch to the man's wrist, sending the weapon clattering across the wet asphalt. The second mugger tried to grab him from behind, but Marcus elbowed him in the ribs and spun around to face both threats. What followed was brief but decisive. Marcus fought with the desperation of a man who knew that somewhere across town his little girl was waiting for him to come home safe. He couldn't afford to lose this fight, couldn't afford to leave Emma without her only parent. The first attacker went down hard after a perfectly timed uppercut, and his partner decided discretion was the better part of valor, helping his friend to his feet before they both disappeared into the maze of downtown alleys. Marcus stood there, breathing hard, rain streaming down his face as he watched the muggers retreat. Only then did he turn to check on the woman they'd been terrorizing. She was pressed against the courthouse wall, her dark hair disheveled, her expensive suit wrinkled but intact. What struck him most were her eyes, intelligent and sharp even in her moment of vulnerability. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice gentle now that the danger had passed. She shook her head, still catching her breath. "No, I'm fine. Thanks to you." She straightened her jacket and attempted to compose herself, but Marcus could see her hands trembling slightly. "That was incredibly brave of you, and incredibly stupid." Despite everything, Marcus found himself smiling. "Yeah, well, stupidity runs in my family. Are you sure you're okay? Did they take anything?" "Nothing," she confirmed, checking her briefcase and purse. "You got here just in time." She looked at him more carefully now, taking in his work clothes, the calluses on his hands, the genuine concern in his expression. "I'm Judge Patricia Wells," Marcus felt a flicker of recognition at the name, but he couldn't place it. Judges weren't exactly part of his usual social circle. Marcus Thompson. And you really shouldn't be walking alone out here this late, Your Honor. This neighborhood gets pretty rough after dark. Judge Wells almost smiled at that. Noted. I was working late and didn't realize how bad the weather had gotten. She hesitated, then added, How can I repay you for this? Dinner? A reward? Marcus shook his head firmly. Not necessary. I've got a daughter at home who's probably wondering where I am. Just promise me you'll be more careful, okay? Before she could respond, sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Someone must have called the police after hearing the commotion. Marcus glanced around nervously. He didn't have time for police reports and statements. Emma's babysitter. Charged extra after midnight, and he was already stretching his budget thin. I should go, he said quickly. You'll be fine with the cops. Take care of yourself, Judge. Wait, she called after him, but Marcus was already jogging away into the rain, disappearing around the corner before the police cars arrived. Judge. Patricia Wells stood there for a long moment, watching the spot where her rescuer had vanished. There had been something familiar about him, something that nagged at the back of her mind, but she couldn't quite grasp it. The approaching siren snapped her back to reality, and she began preparing to give her statement to the officers. 3 weeks later, Judge Patricia Wells sat in her chambers reviewing the morning's docket when a particular case file caught her attention. Thompson versus Thompson, a custody hearing scheduled for 10 o'clock. She opened the folder and began reading the details, her expression growing more troubled with each page. Marcus Thompson was fighting for sole custody of his 8-year-old daughter Emma. The case had been dragging through the system for months, complicated by his ex-wife's family money and their expensive legal team. According to the file, Diane Thompson had remarried a wealthy businessman and was seeking primary custody, arguing that she could provide Emma with better educational opportunities and a more stable home environment. Patricia frowned as she read. The social worker's reports. Marcus worked 2 jobs to support his daughter, living in a modest apartment in a working-class neighborhood. His ex-wife lived in a mansion in the suburbs with her new husband, complete with a pool, tennis court, and access to elite private schools. On paper, it seemed like an easy decision for the court. But Patricia had learned long ago that the best interests of a child couldn't be measured in square footage or bank account balances. She continued reading, noting that Emma had been living primarily with her father since the divorce 2 years ago. The girl's school records showed steady academic progress, and her teachers described her as happy and well-adjusted. Most telling were the social worker's observations about the bond between father and daughter. Emma lights up when discussing her father, the report noted. She speaks with pride about his work and shows genuine affection when describing their daily routines. When asked about her mother, she becomes more reserved, often referring to the big house and Mommy's new family, in ways that suggest she feels like an outsider in that environment. Patricia set down the file and rubbed her temples. These custody cases were always the most difficult part of her job. She'd seen too many children caught in the middle of adult conflicts, their well-being secondary to parental egos and legal maneuvering. The fact that Marcus Thompson was representing himself while facing off against one of the city's most expensive family law firms made her even more concerned about the fairness of the proceedings. Her assistant knocked and entered. Your Honor, the Thompson custody case is ready to begin. Both parties are present. Patricia gathered the file and headed to the courtroom, her mind already wrestling with the complexities ahead. As she entered through the side door, she glanced at the 2 parties seated at opposite tables. On the left sat a polished woman in designer clothes next to a man in expensive suit who was clearly her attorney. On the right was a single man in his best dress shirt and tie, a stack of handwritten notes in front of him. When the man looked up, Patricia felt her breath catch. In her throat. It was him. The Good Samaritan from that rainy night 3 weeks ago. Looking uncomfortable in his courtroom attire, but with the same steady, honest eyes she remembered. Marcus Thompson, the man who had risked his life to save her from muggers, was sitting in her courtroom fighting for custody of his daughter. Patricia quickly composed herself and took her seat at the bench. The irony wasn't lost on her. The man who had protected her in that dark alley was now completely at her mercy in this legal battle. She would have to be extra careful to remain impartial, to judge this case purely on its merits, despite her personal gratitude to him. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady and professional. "We're here today for the custody matter of Thompson versus Thompson regarding the minor child Emma Thompson. Let the record show that both parties are present. Mrs. Thompson, you're represented by counsel. Mr. Thompson, I see you're representing yourself today." Marcus stood slightly. "Yes, Your Honor. I couldn't afford an attorney, but I've prepared my case as best I can." His voice was just as she remembered it, calm and respectful. Patricia noticed he didn't show any sign of recognizing her, which wasn't surprising given her changed appearance in judicial robes versus rain-soaked business attire in a dark alley. "Very well, Mrs. Thompson's counsel, you may begin." The next hour was painful to watch. Diane Thompson's attorney, Richard Sterling, presented a case that was both compelling and devastating. He painted a picture of a loving mother who had gotten her life together after a difficult divorce, now married to a successful businessman who was eager to provide for Emma's future. He presented financial documents showing Marcus's modest income from his jobs at the diner and occasional construction work, contrasting it with the Thompson-Morrison household's substantial assets. "Your Honor," Sterling argued, "while we don't question Mr. Thompson's love for his daughter, love alone cannot provide the educational and social opportunities that Emma deserves. My client has enrolled Emma in Harrison Academy, one of the finest private schools in the state. She has access to tutoring, music lessons, and cultural experiences that simply aren't available in her current situation." He went on to detail the advantages of the suburban home, the stable two-parent household, and the financial security that Diane and her new husband could provide. It was a textbook presentation that would be difficult for any self-represented parent to counter. When it was Marcus's turn, Patricia watched him stand slowly, his hands slightly shaking as he arranged his handwritten notes. She found herself silently rooting for him, hoping he could articulate what she sensed from reading the social worker's reports about his relationship with Emma. "Your Honor," Marcus began, his voice gaining strength as he spoke, "I won't pretend I can give Emma everything that money can buy. I work 2 jobs just to keep us afloat, and sometimes I come home so tired I can barely help her with homework. But what I can give her is something that can't be bought." He paused, looking directly at Patricia, and for a moment she wondered if he might recognize her. But his gaze moved on as he continued. "Emma is the center of my world. Every decision I make, every sacrifice I've made since the divorce, has been about giving her the best life I can. Not the fanciest life, but the best life. She knows that when she wakes up scared from a nightmare, I'll be there. When she has a bad day at school, she knows she can tell me about it over dinner that we cook together. When she's proud of something she's accomplished, she knows I'll celebrate with her like she just won the Nobel Prize." Marcus's voice cracked slightly, but he pressed on. "Her mother left us 2 years ago to start a new life. She's built something beautiful with her new husband, and I'm genuinely happy for her. But Emma already has a life with me, and it's a good one. Maybe it's not perfect, maybe our apartment isn't as big as that mansion, but it's filled with love and consistency, and the knowledge that she's the most important thing in my world." He shuffled through his notes, pulling out several sheets of paper. "I have letters here from Emma's teachers, from our neighbors, from her soccer coach. They all say the same thing, that Emma is a happy, confident, Well-adjusted kid who talks constantly about her dad and the things we do together. Your Honor, I'm not asking you to choose poverty over wealth. I'm asking you to choose love over money, stability over status, and a proven relationship over promises of a better life. Patricia felt a tightness in her chest as she listened to him. This was exactly the kind of argument she hoped to hear in these cases, but it was also exactly the kind of argument that often lost to more polished legal presentations. The law, unfortunately, often favored measurable advantages over emotional. Bonds. Sterling was on his feet immediately for rebuttal. Your Honor, no one questions Mr. Thompson's devotion to his daughter, but devotion doesn't pay for college tuition. It doesn't provide the networking opportunities that come with elite education. It doesn't offer the security of a two-parent household with stable finances. My client isn't trying to remove Emma from her father's life. She's proposing generous visitation that would allow Mr. Thompson to maintain his relationship with his daughter while ensuring Emma has access to opportunities that could shape her entire future. The attorney's arguments were logical, well-researched, and persuasive. Patricia had seen dozens of similar cases where the parent with greater resources ultimately prevailed, regardless of the emotional bonds involved. The system was designed to consider the child's best interests, but those interests were often interpreted through the lens of financial advantage. I'd like to hear from the social worker, Patricia announced. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Ms. Rodriguez, please present your findings. Maria Rodriguez had been working with the Thompson family for 6 months, conducting home visits and interviews with all parties involved. Her report would carry significant weight in Patricia's decision. Your Honor, this has been one of the more challenging cases I've evaluated, Rodriguez began. Both parents clearly love Emma, but they offer very different environments. Mrs. Thompson's home is impressive, with excellent schools and resources. However, during my visits, I observed that Emma seemed somewhat overwhelmed by the luxury and often referred to feeling like she had to be perfect to fit in. She consulted her notes before continuing. In contrast, Emma's demeanor in her father's apartment was completely different. She was relaxed, natural, and clearly comfortable in her surroundings. She showed me art projects on the refrigerator, her own small bedroom that she'd decorated herself, and spoke extensively about daily routines with her father that seemed to bring her genuine joy. Rodriguez paused, clearly struggling with her assessment. Your Honor, if this decision were based solely on financial resources and educational opportunities, the choice would be clear. But my professional opinion is that Emma has formed her primary attachment with her father. Removing her from that environment could cause significant emotional trauma, regardless of the material benefits she might gain. Patricia nodded, absorbing this crucial testimony. The social worker's assessment aligned with her own instincts about the case, but she knew that instincts weren't enough. She needed to make a decision that would hold up under scrutiny and truly serve Emma's best interests. I'd like to speak with Emma privately, Patricia announced. This wasn't unusual in custody cases involving older children, but she could see the anxiety on both parents' faces. We'll take a 30-minute recess, and then I'll meet with Emma in my chambers. As the courtroom cleared, Patricia remained at the bench, staring at the case file. She thought about that rainy night, about Marcus's immediate willingness to help a stranger without expecting anything in return. She thought about his testimony today, raw and unpolished but filled with genuine emotion. Most of all, she thought about the little girl who was about to walk into her chambers, a child whose entire future would be determined by the decision Patricia made today. The weight of judicial responsibility had never felt heavier. In a few hours, she would have to choose between a father's love and a mother's resources, between emotional security and financial advantage, between keeping a family together and potentially providing better opportunities. Whatever she decided would echo through Emma Thompson's life for years to come. Marcus sat in the hallway during the recess, his head in his hands. The morning had been even more brutal than he'd expected. Diane's lawyer had made him feel like a failure as a provider, highlighting every financial shortcoming and limitation in his life. Even worse, the man's arguments made sense. Maybe Emma would be better off with tutors and tennis lessons and a college fund he could never provide. But then he thought about last Tuesday night, when Emma had crawled into his lap during a thunderstorm and asked him to tell her the story about the brave night again. He thought about Saturday mornings when they made pancakes together, and she insisted on flipping them herself, even though half ended up on the floor. He thought about the way she hugged him so tight before school each morning, like she was storing up love to get through the day. These weren't things that could be measured in a courtroom, but they were everything that mattered to him. Emma wasn't just his daughter. She was his partner in rebuilding their lives after Diane had left. They'd created something beautiful together. In their small apartment, something that couldn't be replicated in a mansion with strangers. His phone buzzed with a text from his boss at the diner. "How's court going? Praying for you both." Marcus smiled despite his anxiety. That was the kind of community he and Emma had built. People who cared about them not because of what they could provide, but because of who they were. Emma's teachers, their neighbors, the other parents at soccer practice. They all knew Emma as a happy, confident kid who was thriving in her current environment. When the bailiff called him back into the courtroom, Marcus felt a strange sense of calm settle over him. He'd done everything he could to present his case. Now it was in the hands of a judge he didn't know, someone who would have to weigh his love against Diane's money and make an impossible choice. As he took his seat, Marcus glanced up at Judge Wells and felt that same odd sense of familiarity he'd experienced during the morning session. There was something about her bearing, her voice, the way she carried herself that reminded him of someone. But he pushed the thought aside, focusing instead on Emma, who was being escorted back into the courtroom after her private meeting with the judge. His daughter looked small and serious as she took her seat in the front row, her eyes finding his immediately. She gave him a brave smile that nearly broke his heart. Whatever happened today, he was proud of the strong, resilient little person she'd become. Judge Wells returned to the bench, her expression unreadable. Patricia had spent 20 minutes talking with Emma Thompson, and the conversation had only made her decision more difficult. The 8-year-old was articulate and thoughtful, clearly intelligent and emotionally mature for her age. She'd spoken about both parents with love, but when pressed about where she felt most comfortable, most herself, her answer had been unambiguous. "I love Mommy," Emma had said, "but her new house feels like a museum where I have to be careful not to break anything. Daddy's apartment feels like home. It's where I can be messy and loud and just be me." When Patricia had asked about school and activities, Emma had shrugged. "The fancy school is pretty, but I like my regular school. My friends are there, and my teacher knows that I'm good at math but need help with writing. At the fancy school, nobody knows me yet." Most telling had been Emma's response when asked what she was most afraid of. "I'm scared Daddy will be sad if I have to live somewhere else. He tries to hide it, but I know he gets lonely when I'm not there. We take care of each other." Now, looking out at the courtroom, Patricia saw 3 adults whose lives would be forever changed by her next words. Diane Thompson looked confident, her expensive attorney sitting beside her with the satisfaction of someone who'd presented an unassailable case. Marcus Thompson looked resigned but hopeful, his hands folded tightly in his lap. And in the front row, Emma sat between her parents' worlds, waiting to learn which one would claim her. After careful consideration of all testimony and evidence, "Presented," Patricia began, her voice carrying the full weight of judicial authority. "This court finds that while both parents clearly love Emma and want what's best for her, the child's best interests are served by maintaining stability in her primary residence and relationship." She paused, seeing Marcus's eyes widen with cautious hope while Diane's confident expression began to falter. The court recognizes the significant financial and educational advantages that Mrs. Thompson can provide. However, the testimony of the social worker, the school reports, and most importantly, Emma's own expressed preferences make clear that her emotional and psychological well-being are best served by remaining in her father's primary custody. Marcus felt his knees go weak with relief, but Patricia wasn't finished. However, this court also recognizes that Emma benefits from her relationship with her mother and stepfather. Therefore, Mrs. Thompson will have liberal visitation rights, including alternating weekends, 1 evening per week, and extended time during school holidays. Additionally, Mrs. Thompson may contribute to Emma's educational expenses and extracurricular activities, ensuring she has access to opportunities that enhance her development. Patricia looked directly at Emma, who was grinning widely at her father. Most importantly, both parents will attend co-parenting counseling to ensure that Emma continues to benefit from loving relationships with both sides of her family, free from the conflict that has marked these proceedings. She brought down her gavel with finality. This court is adjourned. As people began filing out of the courtroom, Marcus sat frozen in his chair, hardly believing what had just happened. Emma had already launched herself into his arms, hugging him with the fierce intensity of a child who'd been afraid of losing everything she knew. "We get to stay together, Daddy," she whispered against his neck. "Yeah, sweetheart," he whispered back, his voice thick with emotion. "We get to stay together." Diane approached them, her face a mix of disappointment and acceptance. "Marcus, I want you to know that I really thought I was doing what was best for her." Marcus looked up at his ex-wife, seeing not an adversary but a mother who genuinely loved their daughter. "I know you did, Diane, and the judge was right. Emma needs both of us in her life. We just need to figure out how to make that work better." As they discussed the logistics of the new visitation schedule, Marcus noticed Judge Wells gathering her papers at the bench. Something about her profile, the way she moved, tugged at his memory again. When she looked up and their eyes met across the courtroom, he felt a jolt of recognition so strong it took his breath away. It was her. The woman from the alley, the judge he'd saved from those muggers 3 weeks ago. Judge Patricia Wells had been holding his daughter's future in her hands, making the most important decision of his life, and he'd had no idea that they'd met before under such dramatic circumstances. Their eyes held for a long moment across the courtroom, and Marcus saw in her expression that she remembered too. A slight nod, almost imperceptible, passed between them. An acknowledgement that fate had brought them together twice now, each time when one of them needed help the most. As Patricia disappeared through the side door to her chambers, Marcus gathered Emma and headed for the exit. Outside the courthouse, Chicago's autumn sun was shining brightly, a stark contrast to that rainy night that now seemed like a lifetime ago. Emma chattered excitedly about going home, about seeing her room again, about the celebration dinner they would cook together. Walking down the courthouse steps with his daughter's hand in his, Marcus thought about the strange ways life connected people. A moment of courage in a dark alley had somehow led to this moment of triumph in a bright courtroom. He'd acted without thinking that night, driven by instinct to protect someone in danger. Today, that same someone had protected him and Emma. In return, though her oath of judicial impartiality meant she could never acknowledge the connection. Sometimes, Marcus realized, doing the right thing came back to you in ways you could never predict. Sometimes the universe had a way of balancing the scales, of rewarding selflessness with unexpected grace. As he helped Emma into his truck for the drive back to their small apartment, their real home, Marcus felt a profound gratitude not just for the judge's decision, but for the mysterious forces that had brought them all together when they needed each other most. The following weeks passed in a blur of adjustment and gratitude. Marcus returned to his routine at the diner with a lightness in his step that his co-workers hadn't seen in months. Emma seemed to bloom even more than usual, her relief at staying in her familiar Environment evident in everything from her improved appetite to her increased chatter about school projects and friends. But Marcus couldn't shake the memory of that moment of recognition in the courtroom. Judge Patricia Wells had saved his family just as surely as he had saved her that rainy night, though her professional ethics meant they could never discuss the connection openly. The weight of that unspoken understanding settled into his daily thoughts, creating a strange sense of unfinished business that he couldn't quite define. Patricia, meanwhile, found herself thinking about the Thompson case more than any custody decision she'd made in her 8 years on the bench. It wasn't unusual for judges to wonder about the long-term outcomes of their rulings, but this felt different. She caught herself looking up Emma's school records in the public database, checking to see if the girl was still thriving in her environment. Every report showed continued academic progress and positive teacher comments, validating her decision but also deepening her personal investment in their welfare. The ethical implications troubled her. Judges were supposed to make decisions and move on, not maintain emotional connections to the families who appeared in their courtrooms. Yet every time she walked past that downtown alley where Marcus had risked his life for a stranger, she felt the pull of a debt that could never be properly acknowledged or repaid. 3 months after the custody hearing, fate intervened again. In the most mundane way possible. Patricia was standing in line at Morrison's Market, the small grocery store near her Lincoln Park townhouse, when she heard a familiar voice in the next aisle over. "Daddy, can we get the cookies with the chocolate chips? The ones that look like tiny cookies inside the big cookies? Those are expensive, Em. How about we make our own chocolate chip cookies this weekend? You can help measure the ingredients." "That's even better. Can I crack the eggs?" "I'm really good at it now. You can crack the eggs, but I'm handling the flour." "Remember what happened last time you tried to measure flour by yourself?" Emma's giggle was infectious. "It looked like it snowed in our kitchen." Patricia found herself smiling as she recognized the voices of Marcus and Emma Thompson. She moved slightly to peek around the end cap display and saw them comparing prices on different items, Emma helping her father make careful calculations about their weekly budget. The scene was both heartwarming and heartbreaking, watching a father and daughter make a game out of financial necessity. What struck Patricia most was how genuinely happy they seemed together. Emma wasn't acting like a child deprived of luxury. She was engaged and animated, clearly enjoying the simple activity of grocery shopping with her father. Marcus listened to her chatter with the kind of focused attention that spoke of practice and genuine interest, responding to her observations about classmates and teachers with questions that showed he knew the players in her daily drama. "Mrs. Patterson says I might get to read my story to the 3rd graders next week," Emma was saying as they moved toward the checkout line. "It's about a girl who finds a magic quarter that grants wishes, but only good wishes for other people." "That sounds like a great story, sweetheart. Did you base the main character on anyone in particular?" Emma grinned up at her father. "Maybe someone who uses his superpowers to help people even when he's tired from work." Marcus ruffled her hair affectionately. "I think you're confusing me with someone much more interesting." "Nope," Emma said with the absolute certainty of childhood. "You're definitely a superhero. You just wear regular clothes instead of a cape." Patricia felt her throat tighten with emotion as she watched this exchange. The bond between father and daughter was even stronger than what she'd observed in the courtroom. Her decision to keep them together had clearly been the right one, but seeing them in this natural, unguarded moment confirmed it in a way that legal precedents never could. As they approached the checkout, Patricia realized she was about to face an awkward encounter. There was no way to avoid them without abandoning her own groceries, and ducking away would seem odd if they noticed her. She decided to act naturally, hoping for a brief, polite exchange that wouldn't create any uncomfortable ethical complications. "Judge Wells?" The voice belonged to Emma, who had spotted her first. The little girl's face lit up with recognition. and something that looked like genuine pleasure at seeing her again. Marcus turned and immediately went still, his expression cycling through surprise, recognition, and something approaching concern. "Your Honor," he said carefully, his tone respectful but uncertain. "Hello, Emma, Mr. Thompson." Patricia kept her voice neutral and professional, though she felt anything but neutral seeing them again. "How are you both doing?" "We're great," Emma answered enthusiastically before her father could respond. "Daddy and I are making cookies this weekend, and I'm going to read my story to the little kids at school, and we planted tomatoes in pots on our fire escape, even though it's getting cold, because Daddy says hope is about trying things, even when you're not sure they'll work." Marcus placed a gentle hand on his daughter's shoulder, his way of reminding her not to overwhelm strangers with information. But Patricia found herself charmed by the girl's openness. "That sounds wonderful, Emma. Gardening is a great hobby, even in small spaces." She looked at Marcus, noting how he seemed to be calculating whether this interaction was appropriate. "I hope your tomatoes thrive despite the season. Daddy says even if they don't grow big, we'll learn something for next year," Emma continued. "He's really good at finding the good parts of things that don't work out perfect." The checkout line moved forward, and Patricia found herself directly behind the Thompsons as they unloaded their cart. She couldn't help but notice Marcus's careful attention to prices, the way he had Emma help him organize their items by category, and the small stack of coupons he'd clipped from newspapers. Everything about their shopping trip spoke of careful planning and making the most of limited resources. When the cashier rang up their total, Marcus counted out exact change from a small envelope marked "groceries" in Emma's careful handwriting. Patricia realized this was probably how they managed their budget, with cash allocated for specific expenses to ensure they never overspent. It was a level of financial discipline born from necessity, but also from responsibility. "Have a good day, Your Honor," Marcus said as they gathered their bags, his tone still formally respectful. "You too, Mr. Thompson. Emma, good luck with your story reading." "Thank you." Emma waved enthusiastically as they headed toward the exit. Patricia completed her own transaction in a thoughtful haze, her mind processing what she'd just witnessed. The grocery store encounter had shown her something the courtroom couldn't capture, the day-to-day reality of the life she'd preserved with her custody decision. Marcus and Emma weren't just surviving. They were building something meaningful together, creating traditions and memories that would shape the girl's character far more than any expensive school or elaborate vacation ever could. But the encounter also highlighted the strange position she found herself in. She knew more about this family than any judge should know about former litigants, and her knowledge created a personal investment that was both ethically complicated and emotionally unavoidable. She cared about their well-being in a way that went beyond professional satisfaction with a good decision. 2 weeks later, Patricia was working late in her chambers when her assistant knocked with an urgent message. There had been an incident at Harrison Elementary, Emma's school. A water main had burst, flooding several classrooms and forcing an emergency evacuation. Parents were being called to pick up their children immediately. The message wasn't for Patricia, of course. She had no official connection to the situation, but her assistant had mentioned it because she'd recognized Emma's name from the recent custody case and thought the judge might want to know that the family was dealing with an emergency situation. Patricia stared at the message, wrestling with impulses that had no place in a judge's professional considerations. She had no business involving herself in the personal crisis of people who had appeared in her courtroom. Yet the thought of 8-year-old Emma caught in a frightening situation, possibly unable to reach her father who was working 2 jobs, created an anxiety in Patricia that she couldn't rationalize away. She found herself reaching for her phone to call the school, then stopping. She had no authority to involve herself, no legitimate reason to check on a child's welfare beyond general human concern. But general human concern had never felt quite so urgent before. Instead, she did something that surprised even her. She left her chambers earlier than usual and drove past Harrison Elementary on her way home, telling herself she was simply taking a different route through the neighborhood. What she saw when she arrived made her pull over immediately. The school parking lot was chaos. Emergency vehicles lined the street, and dozens of parents were clustered around the main entrance waiting for information about their children. Patricia could see water flowing out of the building's lower level, and workers were setting up pumps to manage the flooding. She spotted Marcus almost immediately, running across the parking lot from where he'd apparently abandoned his truck in his haste to reach the school. His face was tight with worry as he pushed through the crowd of parents, trying to find someone who could tell him about Emma's status. Patricia watched him approach a frazzled school administrator, saw him listen intently to whatever information she provided, then saw his shoulders relax slightly with relief. A few minutes later, Emma appeared in a group of children being escorted from the building by their teachers. The little girl spotted her father immediately and ran to him, muddy sneakers and all. The embrace between father and daughter was fierce and immediate. Marcus lifted Emma off the ground, holding her tightly while she chattered about the exciting day she'd had watching the firefighters work and helping her teacher gather books from their flooded classroom. Even from a distance, Patricia could see that what might have traumatized some children had become an adventure for Emma, largely because of her father's calm response to the crisis. Marcus was listening carefully to Emma's account of events, checking her over for any signs of distress while simultaneously gathering information from other parents about what would happen next. Patricia watched him comfort a younger boy whose parents hadn't arrived yet, naturally taking on the role of a supportive adult for any child who needed reassurance. She should have driven away then. She'd seen what she needed to see. Emma was safe. Marcus had responded appropriately to the emergency, and their bond was clearly strong enough to weather unexpected challenges. But something kept her there, watching as Marcus helped other families organize carpools and playdates for children whose classrooms would be unusable for several days. "Daddy, can Jeremy come to our house?" Emma was asking as Patricia finally prepared to leave. "His mom is stuck at work and he's scared about tomorrow." Marcus didn't hesitate. "Of course he can. We'll make grilled cheese for everyone and figure out what's happening with school tomorrow." As Patricia drove home through the darkening October evening, she reflected on what she'd witnessed. Marcus Thompson wasn't just a good father. He was the kind of person who instinctively took care of others when crisis struck. The same protective instinct that had driven him to help a stranger in an alley was evident in how he'd responded to the school emergency, extending his natural caretaking beyond his own daughter to any child who needed support. Her decision to maintain his custody of Emma had been legally sound, but seeing him in action during an unexpected crisis confirmed it was also morally right. Emma was being raised by someone who would teach her through example how to respond to life's challenges with grace and concern for others. The next morning brought news that Harrison Elementary would be closed for at least a week while repairs were completed. Patricia found herself wondering how Marcus would manage the childcare challenge with his work schedule, but she pushed the thought aside. These weren't her problems to solve, regardless of how invested she'd become in their welfare. But fate seemed determined to keep weaving their lives together in unexpected ways. That afternoon, Patricia was leaving the courthouse when she nearly collided with Marcus and Emma coming up the front steps. The little girl was carrying a handmade thank you card, and Marcus looked distinctly uncomfortable about whatever errand had brought them there. "Judge Wells," Marcus said, stopping abruptly when he saw her. "I'm sorry, we didn't mean to." Emma wanted to. "I made you a card," Emma interrupted, holding up her creation proudly. "Daddy said we should thank the people who help us, and you helped us stay together, so I made you a card with a picture of our apartment and our tomato plants." Patricia looked at the construction paper creation, covered in Emma's careful artwork. and decorated with glitter that was already starting to shed onto the courthouse steps. The drawing showed a small apartment building with a fire escape, two stick figures labeled Daddy and Emma, and what appeared to be tomato plants in pots. At the bottom, in careful second-grade handwriting, it read, "Thank you for letting us stay together. Love, Emma." "Emma, this is beautiful," Patricia said, accepting the card with genuine emotion. "Thank you so much for thinking of me. Daddy said judges probably don't get very many thank you cards, and that made me sad because you do important work helping families," Emma explained. "So I wanted to make sure you knew that what you did mattered to us." Marcus looked mortified by his daughter's directness, but Patricia found herself deeply moved by the gesture. In 8 years on the bench, she had indeed received very few personal acknowledgments from the families whose lives she'd impacted. Most people left her courtroom angry, regardless of her decision, and moved on with their lives without looking back. "You're absolutely right that judges don't usually receive cards like this," Patricia told Emma. "It means more to me than you can imagine. Can I ask you something?" Emma continued, apparently encouraged by Patricia's positive response. Marcus looked like he wanted to disappear, but Patricia nodded. "Do you have kids? Because you seemed like you understood about families when you were asking me questions that day." The question hit Patricia unexpectedly hard. "No, Emma, I don't have children. But I care very much about making sure kids are happy and safe." "That must be sad." "Sometimes," Emma said with the matter-of-fact empathy that children sometimes displayed. "But I bet you help lots of kids even if they're not yours." "I try to," Patricia replied, surprised by how much this 8-year-old's perspective affected her. Marcus finally found his voice. "Emma, we should let Judge Wells get back to her work. Thank you for accepting the card, Your Honor. It meant a lot to her to be able to thank you properly." As they prepared to leave, Emma turned back with one more question. "Judge Wells, do you like chocolate chip cookies? Because Daddy and I are making some this weekend, and we always make too many." Before Patricia could respond, Marcus was gently steering his daughter away from what was clearly becoming an uncomfortable situation for him. "Emma, Judge Wells is very busy. We can't invite her to our baking projects." "Why not?" Emma asked with genuine confusion. "She helped our family." "That makes her kind of like family too, doesn't it?" Patricia watched them disappear into the courthouse, probably there for some administrative matter related to the custody case, and stood holding Emma's card as the late afternoon Chicago wind whipped around the courthouse steps. The child's innocent logic was both touching and problematic. In Emma's world, people who helped each other naturally became connected, creating informal extended families based on kindness rather than blood or legal relationships. But the adult world was more complicated, hedged with professional boundaries and ethical considerations that 8-year-olds couldn't understand. Patricia couldn't become personally involved with the Thompson family, no matter how much Emma's openness appealed to her or how much she respected Marcus's character. Her role in their lives had ended when she signed the custody order. Yet as she drove home that evening, Emma's card on the passenger seat beside her, Patricia found herself questioning the rigid boundaries she'd maintained throughout her career. She'd always prided herself on professional distance, on making decisions based purely on legal merit without emotional involvement. But perhaps there was something to be said for Emma's simpler worldview, where kindness created connections that transcended formal roles. That weekend, Patricia found herself baking chocolate chip cookies in her own kitchen, something she hadn't done in years. She told herself it was just a coincidence, that she'd simply been inspired by Emma's enthusiasm for baking projects. But as she measured flour and cracked eggs, she thought about a father and daughter doing the same thing across town, probably laughing together as Emma tried to prove her improved egg-cracking skills. Monday morning brought a new case to Patricia's docket, another custody dispute that would require her to make life-altering decisions for children she'd never met before that day. As she reviewed the files, she realized that her encounter with the Thompson family had changed something fundamental about how she approached these cases. She found herself looking beyond the financial documentation and legal arguments to consider the small human details that revealed how families actually function together. The change wasn't dramatic, but it was significant. She asked different questions during hearings, paid closer attention to the emotional dynamics between parents and children, and considered more carefully how her decisions would affect the daily lives of the families involved. Emma Thompson's simple wisdom about helping people becoming like family had reminded Patricia why she'd wanted to be a family court judge in the first place. 3 weeks later, Patricia was reviewing case files when her assistant brought in the morning mail. Among the usual legal correspondence was an envelope addressed in careful second-grade handwriting. Inside was another card from Emma, this one featuring a drawing of what appeared to be a courtroom with a judge and a little girl shaking hands. "Dear Judge Wells," the note read, "I wanted to tell you that our tomatoes grew even though it got cold. Daddy says it's because we gave them love and good soil and protection from the wind. He says families are like that too. Thank you for giving us good soil. Love, Emma. P.S. We still make too many cookies every weekend." Patricia sat at her desk holding the card, feeling emotions she couldn't quite name. Emma's innocent gratitude and Marcus's thoughtful parenting lessons filtered through a child's perspective had created something she'd never experienced before, a sense that her judicial decisions had meaning beyond legal resolution, that she'd actually helped build something beautiful in the world rather than simply arbitrating disputes. She knew she couldn't respond to Emma's card directly. The ethical boundaries remained clear, even if the emotional ones had become more complicated. But she also knew that the Thompson family had changed her, had reminded her of the human stories behind every legal decision and the responsibility she carried to protect not just children's legal rights, but their capacity for happiness. That evening, Patricia drove past Harrison Elementary, which had reopened after the flood damage repairs. She could see children on the playground during after-school care, including a familiar small figure with dark pigtails who was organizing what appeared to be an elaborate game, involving several soccer balls and a great deal of enthusiastic shouting. Emma Thompson was clearly thriving in her environment, surrounded by friends who knew her well and engaged in the kind of creative play that spoke of confidence and security. The sight filled Patricia with a satisfaction that went deeper than professional accomplishment. She'd helped preserve something precious, something that couldn't be measured in bank accounts or educational opportunities, but was nonetheless invaluable. As autumn deepened into winter, Patricia found herself unconsciously tracking the Thompson family's progress through small signs and coincidental encounters. She saw Marcus at the hardware store buying weather stripping for their apartment windows, Emma at the library checking out books about space exploration, both of them at the community center's holiday craft fair where Emma was proudly selling hand-decorated picture frames to raise money for the animal shelter. Each sighting confirmed what Patricia had hoped, that her custody decision had preserved not just a family relationship, but a way of life that was teaching Emma important values about resilience, community involvement, and finding joy in simple pleasures. The girl was growing up with a clear sense of security and purpose, qualities that would serve her far better than any material advantage. But the most meaningful encounter came on a snowy December evening when Patricia was leaving a late chamber session. As she walked to her car in the courthouse parking garage, she heard voices echoing in the concrete space. A man was trying to change a flat tire in the cold, his young daughter standing nearby holding a flashlight and offering encouragement. "It's okay, Daddy. You fixed our sink last month, so you can definitely fix a tire. You're good at fixing things. Thanks for the vote of confidence, Em. Can you angle the light a little more toward the lug nuts?" Patricia recognized their voices immediately and found herself approaching to offer help before she'd consciously decided to get involved. "Mr. Thompson, do you need assistance?" Marcus looked up from where he was struggling with a stubborn lug nut, his face cycling through surprise and embarrassment. "Judge Wells, I'm sorry, we'll be out of your way soon. The tire went flat while we were at Emma's school concert." "How was the concert?" Patricia asked Emma, who was bundled in a winter coat that was slightly too big for her, but looked warm and well-loved. "It was great. I got to play the triangle in 3 songs, and I only missed one cue. Daddy recorded it on his phone so we can watch it again at home." "That sounds wonderful. Mr. Thompson, do you have everything you need for the tire?" "I could call a if that would help." Marcus shook his head, though Patricia could see he was struggling with the cold and the awkward position required to change the tire. "I've got it handled, but thank you." "Emma, can you get back in the car where it's warm? This shouldn't take much longer." "I want to help," Emma protested. "Besides, you said emergencies are easier when we work together." Patricia found herself smiling at the girl's determination to be useful. "She's right about working together. Emma, why don't you keep holding that light while I help your father with the tire?" Before Marcus could protest, Patricia had crouched down beside him and was helping to steady the jack while he worked on the lug nuts. Her expensive wool coat would probably never recover from contact with the dirty garage floor, but at the moment she didn't care. "Your Honor, you really don't need to," Marcus began. "It's cold. You have an 8-year-old waiting, and I have 2 working hands," Patricia replied practically. "Besides, Emma's right about emergencies being easier when people work together." The 3 of them worked in companionable silence for the next few minutes, Emma providing commentary and encouragement while Marcus and Patricia managed the mechanical aspects of changing the tire. It was strangely intimate, the shared problem-solving in the echoing garage, stripped of all the formal roles and boundaries that usually defined their interactions. "There," Marcus said finally, tightening the last lug nut. "That should get us home safely." "You both did great," Emma announced. "Judge Wells, you're really good at helping with tires. Do you fix lots of things?" "Not usually car tires," Patricia admitted, standing and brushing dirt off her coat. "But I try to help when I can." As they gathered their tools and prepared to leave, Marcus hesitated, then said quietly, "Thank you for this and for everything else. I know you were just doing your job with the custody case, but it meant everything to us." Patricia met his eyes in the dim garage lighting, seeing gratitude and something deeper that she couldn't quite identify. "You're welcome. Both of you take care driving home in this weather." "We will," Emma promised. "And Judge Wells, if you ever need help with anything, we're really good at working together on problems. Daddy says that's what friends do." As Patricia watched them drive carefully out of the garage, Emma waving from the passenger window, she realized that the boundaries she'd tried so hard to maintain had been quietly dissolving over the past few months. Not in any dramatic or inappropriate way, but through small human connections that transcended professional roles. Emma's innocent assumption that helping each other made people friends wasn't far from the truth. Over the course of several chance encounters, Patricia had come to care about this family in a way that went beyond judicial satisfaction with a good decision. She respected Marcus's dedication to his daughter, admired Emma's resilience and optimism, and found herself genuinely invested in their continued happiness. It was ethically complicated, emotionally risky, and completely unprecedented in her professional experience. But as Patricia drove home through the snowy Chicago streets, she couldn't bring herself to regret the connection that had developed between them. Sometimes, she thought, the most meaningful relationships grew from the most unlikely circumstances, nurtured by small acts of kindness that accumulated over time into something approaching friendship. The question was what to do with these feelings. and connections that had no clear place in the structured world of legal ethics and professional boundaries. Patricia had spent her career avoiding exactly this kind of personal involvement with families from her courtroom. But the Thompson case had changed her in ways she was still trying to understand. As she pulled into her driveway, Patricia made a decision that surprised her. Tomorrow she would bake chocolate chip cookies. And if she happened to make too many, perhaps it was time to accept that some boundaries were meant to be carefully, thoughtfully crossed. The cookies were a mistake. Patricia realized the moment she rang the doorbell. Standing outside the modest apartment building on Sunday afternoon with a plate of homemade chocolate chip cookies felt presumptuous, inappropriate, and completely outside the bounds of judicial propriety. But Emma's enthusiastic voice calling, "Daddy, someone's at the door," made retreat impossible. Marcus answered wearing flour-dusted jeans and a surprised expression that quickly shifted to concern. "Judge Wells, is everything all right?" "I'm sorry to bother you," Patricia began, feeling increasingly foolish. "Emma mentioned you always make too many cookies, and I realized I had the same problem today. I thought perhaps you brought U.S. cookies." Emma appeared beside her father, her face lighting up with delight. "Daddy, look. Judge Wells made cookies just like us." Marcus looked uncertain, clearly struggling with the social dynamics of having a judge appear unannounced at his home. But Emma had already taken Patricia's coat and was ushering her into their small living room, chattering about the amazing coincidence of Sunday afternoon baking. "We were just finishing our batch," Emma explained, leading Patricia toward the kitchen. "Ours have extra chocolate chips because I like to be generous with good things. Daddy says generosity is one of the best qualities a person can have." The apartment was exactly what Patricia had imagined from Emma's drawings, small but warm and clearly loved. Mismatched furniture had been arranged to create cozy conversation areas. Emma's artwork covered the refrigerator, and the scent of baking cookies made the space feel like home in a way that no amount of expensive decoration could achieve. "Please, sit down," Marcus said, still sounding formal despite the domestic setting. "Can I get you some coffee, tea?" "Coffee would be lovely, thank you." Patricia settled onto the second-hand sofa, noting how Emma immediately curled up beside her, as if they were old friends rather than near strangers with a complicated professional history. "Tell me about your cookies," Emma requested. "Did you use vanilla?" "Daddy always puts in extra vanilla because he says it makes people happy." As Patricia described her baking process, she found herself relaxing despite the unusual circumstances. Emma's natural curiosity and Marcus's gradual warming created an atmosphere that transcended the awkwardness of the situation. When Marcus brought coffee and they sampled both batches of cookies, declaring them equally delicious, Patricia felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the simple pleasure of spending time with people who seemed genuinely glad to see her. "Judge Wells," Emma said suddenly. "Can I ask you something kind of personal?" Marcus intervened quickly. "Emma, remember what we talked about regarding appropriate questions for adults?" "It's all right," Patricia said, curious about what was on the child's mind. "What would you like to know? Are you lonely? Because you seem really nice, and nice people shouldn't have to be by themselves all the time. Daddy was lonely before we got to be a family again, and I could tell because he got really quiet during happy movies." The directness of the question caught Patricia off guard. That's a very thoughtful question, Emma. I suppose I am sometimes. Yes, that's what I thought," Emma nodded sagely. "You have the same kind of quiet that Daddy used to have. But being here with us made you smile different, like you do when you really mean it." Marcus looked mortified. "Emma, honey, that's very personal." "It's okay," Patricia assured him, touched by the child's perceptive observation. "Emma's right. I do get lonely sometimes. My job keeps me very busy, but it doesn't always provide the kind of company that makes you smile the way you mean it." "Well, you can visit us whenever you want," Emma announced with the confidence of someone who had never encountered a social situation she couldn't solve with direct kindness. "We always have extra food, and Daddy likes talking to grown-ups who aren't asking him to refill their coffee cups." "Emma," Marcus warned gently. "What? It's true. You're always more interesting when you talk about things that aren't work. And Judge Wells probably has lots of interesting things to talk about, since she helps so many families." Patricia spent the next 2 hours in their small apartment, and it became one of the most enjoyable afternoons she'd had in months. Emma showed her the tomato plants on the fire escape, now dormant for winter, but carefully covered with protective cloth. Marcus explained his system for managing work schedules around Emma's needs, revealing a level of organizational skill that impressed Patricia professionally and personally. Most remarkably, they talked about everything except the custody case that had brought them together. Marcus asked about Patricia's background, learning she'd grown up in Ohio before attending law school at Northwestern. Patricia discovered that Marcus had studied engineering at Illinois State before life redirected his career path, and that he'd been teaching Emma basic coding concepts during their evening homework time. "Daddy's really smart," Emma confided. While Marcus was in the kitchen preparing dinner, which Patricia had somehow been persuaded to stay for. "He knows about computers and building things and fixing broken stuff. But mostly he knows how to make me feel safe when things are scary." When Patricia complimented Emma on her thoughtful observations about people, the girl beamed. "Daddy says paying attention to how people feel is the most important skill anyone can learn. He taught me that everyone has invisible feelings that they carry around, and being kind to those feelings is how we make the world better." Dinner was simple but delicious, prepared with the kind of collaborative efficiency that spoke of long practice. Emma set the table with mismatched plates and proudly announced which vegetables she'd helped choose at the grocery store. Marcus served a hearty pasta dish that transformed inexpensive ingredients into something satisfying and nourishing. The conversation flowed naturally, covering Emma's school projects, Marcus's observations about Chicago architecture from his construction work, and Patricia's carefully edited stories about interesting legal cases. Emma asked intelligent questions about how judges made decisions, leading to a discussion about fairness and perspective that impressed Patricia with its sophistication. "Sometimes there isn't a perfect right answer," Patricia explained when Emma asked about difficult cases. "Sometimes a judge has to choose the best available option and hope it helps people build better lives for themselves." "Like when you decided we could stay together," Emma said matter-of-factly. "There probably wasn't a perfect answer, but you picked the one that felt most like love." The simple accuracy of Emma's assessment left Patricia momentarily speechless. This 8-year-old had distilled the complexity of custody decisions down to their essential element, choosing the option that preserved and protected love rather than maximizing material advantage. After dinner, Emma insisted on showing Patricia her bedroom, a small space made magical by creative decoration and careful organization. Drawings covered the walls, books were arranged by color rather than size, and a small desk held evidence of various projects including the cards she'd made for Patricia months earlier. "This is where I do my homework with Daddy," Emma explained, patting the desk chair. "He sits right here and helps me when I get stuck, but he never just gives me the answers. He asks questions that help me figure things out myself." "That sounds like an excellent way to learn," Patricia agreed, noting the careful balance of structure and creativity in Emma's personal space. "Daddy says learning how to think is more important than memorizing facts, because thinking stays with you forever. But facts sometimes change." Emma pulled out a photo album and began showing Patricia pictures of their life together. "Look, this is us at the zoo, and this is when we painted our kitchen yellow because I said it needed to be more cheerful." The photos told the story of a father and daughter creating joy together despite limited resources. Zoo visits, picnics in city parks, art projects, and cooking adventures filled the pages, documenting a life rich in experiences if not in material possessions. Patricia found herself deeply moved by the evidence of their bond and the creativity they brought to making ordinary moments special. When Patricia finally prepared to leave, well past Emma's usual bedtime, she felt reluctant to return to the solitude of her own home. The warmth and connection she'd experienced in their small apartment contrasted sharply with the elegant emptiness of her townhouse. "Thank you for inviting me to stay," she told Marcus as Emma hugged her goodbye with typical enthusiasm. "This has been one of the most enjoyable evenings I've had in a very long time." "Thank you for the cookies," Marcus replied, and Patricia noticed he seemed more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. "And for everything else. Emma's right that you're always welcome here. We don't have much, but what we have, we share gladly." As Patricia drove home through the quiet Sunday evening streets, she reflected on how completely her perspective had shifted over the past few months. The professional distance she'd maintained throughout her career seemed less important now than the human connections that gave life meaning. Emma's innocent wisdom about loneliness and friendship had challenged assumptions Patricia hadn't even realized she held about the appropriate boundaries between her professional and personal life. The following weeks brought a series of small changes that gradually altered the rhythm of Patricia's routine. She began stopping by the market where she'd first encountered the Thompsons, hoping for casual encounters that felt natural rather than intrusive. She found herself taking routes through their neighborhood, not exactly following them, but making herself available for the kind of accidental meetings that had brought them together before. The changes weren't dramatic, but they were significant. Patricia started baking regularly, always making portions large enough to share. She paid more attention to community events, particularly those involving children and families. Most importantly, she began approaching her judicial duties with renewed awareness of the human stories behind legal documents, asking herself not just what the law required, but what would best serve the emotional well-being of the families involved. The shift didn't go unnoticed by her colleagues. "You seem different lately," her bailiff mentioned one afternoon. "More engaged, maybe. Like you're seeing something in these cases that wasn't there before." Patricia realized he was right. Her encounter with the Thompson family had reminded her why she'd wanted to become a family court judge in the first place, not to arbitrate disputes, but to protect and preserve the conditions that allowed love to flourish. Emma's simple observation about choosing the option that felt most like love had become Patricia's unofficial guiding principle. In March, spring arrived early in Chicago, and with it came an invitation that changed everything. Emma had asked Marcus to invite Patricia to her school's science fair, where she would be presenting a project about plant growth that had been inspired by their fire-escape tomato garden. "She's been working on this for weeks," Marcus explained, when he called Patricia's chambers. "I know it's unusual, but she specifically asked if you could come. She says you're part of the story of why our plants grew, because you helped us stay together so we could take care of them." Patricia accepted without hesitation, despite the potential complications of appearing at a school event with a family. From one of her cases, Emma's logic was irrefutable. The custody decision had indeed made their gardening project possible, and Patricia was curious to see how the experience had translated into scientific inquiry. The science fair was held in Harrison Elementary's multipurpose room, which had been transformed into a showcase of creative learning. Emma's project occupied a corner table where she had recreated their fire escape garden in miniature, complete with charts showing growth rates, weather data, and careful observations about plant care. "Judge Wells," Emma called out when she spotted Patricia among the crowd of parents and teachers. "Come see my project. I put you in the acknowledgement section." Patricia approached the display, impressed by the thoroughness of Emma's work. The project demonstrated genuine scientific method, with hypotheses, controlled variables, and conclusions drawn from careful observation. But what touched Patricia most was the small card attached to the display board. Special thanks to Judge Wells, who helped make this project possible by keeping our family together so we could learn about growing things. This is remarkable work, Emma, Patricia said, studying the charts and graphs. You've learned so much about plant biology and scientific observation. Daddy helped me understand about controlling variables and recording data, Emma explained. Proudly, but I did all the measuring and writing myself. And look, our tomatoes did grow. Not huge ones, but enough to make salsa for dinner 3 times. As other visitors examined Emma's project, Patricia found herself in conversation with Emma's teacher, Mrs. Patterson, who had clearly heard about the judge who had helped keep Emma with her father. Emma talks about you regularly, Mrs. Patterson confided. She describes you as someone who helped her family stay together, and she's incorporated that into her understanding of how communities work. Her social studies essays always include themes about people helping each other and how that makes everyone stronger. The observation pleased Patricia more than any professional recognition she'd ever received. Emma had taken the experience of the custody case and transformed it into a broader understanding of social responsibility and community support. The 8-year-old was learning lessons about civic engagement and mutual aid that many adults never mastered. When the science fair concluded and families began heading home, Emma approached Patricia with characteristic directness. Judge Wells, can I ask you something important? Of course, Emma. What's on your mind? Would you like to be part of our family? Not like legally or anything complicated, but like how families choose each other sometimes. Because you've helped us, and we care about you. And caring about each other is what makes people family even when they don't share the same last name. Patricia looked at Marcus, who was watching the exchange with an expression she couldn't quite read. Emma, that's a wonderful question, but it's complicated for adults. Is it because you're a judge and we were in your courtroom? Emma pressed. Because that was work, but this is life. Daddy says work is what you do, but life is who you care about. Marcus stepped forward gently. Emma, honey, Judge Wells has her own life and responsibilities. We can't just adopt her into our family because we'd like to. Why not? Emma asked with the logic of childhood. She's lonely sometimes. We like having her around, and she makes really good cookies. Those seem like excellent qualifications for family membership to me. Patricia found herself laughing despite the emotional complexity of the moment. Emma, I would be honored to be considered part of your family in whatever way feels appropriate. You've both become very important to me. Really? Emma's face lit up with joy. So you'll come to my birthday party next month and help with our summer garden? And maybe sometimes we can have Sunday dinners together, like today, but planned, instead of accidental. I'd like that very much, Patricia replied, meeting Marcus's eyes over Emma's head. His expression had softened into something that looked like relief mixed with gratitude. As they walked to their cars in the school parking lot, Marcus fell into step beside Patricia while Emma skipped ahead, clearly delighted with the arrangement she'd negotiated. I hope Emma's invitation wasn't too presumptuous, Marcus said quietly. She's been asking about you for weeks, wondering if you ever get lonely or if anyone takes care of you the way you helped take care of us. She wasn't presumptuous at all, Patricia assured him. If anything, I'm grateful for her directness. I've been wondering how to maintain a connection with you both without overstepping professional boundaries, and Emma's solved that problem with typical 8-year-old efficiency. Marcus smiled. She has a gift for cutting through adult complications to get to what actually matters. I think she recognized something in you that first day in the courtroom, something that goes beyond your role as a judge. What do you think she recognized? Someone who cares deeply about doing the right thing, Marcus replied. Someone who understands that protecting love is more important than following rules when the two conflict. Emma has good instincts about people, and her instincts about you were clearly correct, As they reached their cars, Emma called out, "Judge Wells, what should I call you when you're not being a judge? Like when we're just being family together?" Patricia considered. The question, "How about Patricia? That's my name when I'm not wearing judicial robes." "Patricia," Emma repeated, testing the sound. "I like it. It sounds friendlier than Your Honor, but still important." Driving home through the spring evening, Patricia reflected on how dramatically her life had changed since that rainy October night when Marcus had saved her from muggers. The chance encounter had led to ethical complications, emotional growth, and now an unconventional family arrangement that defied easy categorization but felt more authentic than any relationship she'd maintained in years. Emma's birthday party the following month became the official inauguration of their chosen family structure. Patricia brought a carefully selected gift, a junior scientist kit that aligned with Emma's demonstrated interests, and found herself welcomed into the small celebration with the warmth typically reserved for beloved relatives. The party was held in the building's community room, decorated with handmade decorations and attended by Emma's school friends and neighbors who had become extended family over the years. Patricia observed how naturally Marcus had created a community around his daughter, how Emma moved confidently among adults who clearly cared about her welfare and celebrated her achievements. "Patricia," Emma called out during the gift opening ceremony, "look what you gave me. Now I can do real experiments like professional scientists." As Emma examined each component of the science kit with genuine excitement, Patricia felt a satisfaction that went beyond the pleasure of giving a good gift. She had chosen something that would encourage Emma's intellectual curiosity and provide opportunities for learning activities with her father. The gift represented Patricia's growing understanding of what this family valued and how she could contribute meaningfully to their lives. Later, as the party wound down and guests began heading home, Emma approached Patricia with a small wrapped package. "I made you something too," she announced. "Since it's my birthday, I get to give presents if I want to." Inside the wrapping was a small photo album Emma had assembled, filled with pictures from their various encounters over the past months. The grocery store meeting, the tire-changing incident, Sunday dinner at their apartment, and the science fair were all documented, with Emma's careful captions describing each event and its significance to their developing relationship. The final page contained a photo of the three of them taken earlier that evening, laughing together over birthday cake, with a caption that read, "Our chosen family." Love isn't about how you meet people, it's about how you decide to keep them. Patricia felt tears threatening as she examined Emma's thoughtful documentation of their friendship. "Emma, this is the most meaningful gift I've ever received." "Really? Better than expensive jewelry or fancy stuff?" "Much better. This represents something that can't be bought, only built through caring and time and shared experiences." As Patricia prepared to leave the party, Marcus walked her to the elevator. "Thank you for being here tonight," he said. "And for everything else. Emma's right that we've become family, but I want you to know how much that means from an adult perspective." 2. "It means everything to me as well," Patricia replied honestly. "I didn't realize how much I needed this connection until Emma insisted on creating it." "She has a gift for seeing what people need and finding ways to provide it," Marcus agreed. "I think she recognized that you were as ready for family as we were ready to expand ours." Over the following months, their chosen family arrangements settled into comfortable routines. Patricia became a regular presence at Emma's school events, soccer games, and weekend activities. She provided homework help in subjects where her legal training offered useful perspectives, and she discovered she had a talent for encouraging Emma's analytical thinking. Marcus and Patricia developed an easy friendship based on mutual respect and shared commitment to Emma's well-being. They took turns managing different aspects of Emma's care, creating a support system that benefited all three of them. Patricia found herself with responsibilities and connections she'd never experienced while Marcus gained a trusted partner in the ongoing project of raising a thoughtful, confident daughter. Most importantly, Emma thrived in the expanded family structure. She gained an additional adult advocate, role model, and source of encouragement, while maintaining the primary bond with her father that had formed the foundation of her security. The arrangement proved that families could be created through choice and commitment rather than biology or legal contract. On a warm June evening, almost a year after the custody hearing that had brought them together, Patricia sat on the fire escape outside Marcus and Emma's apartment, helping tend the expanded garden that now included herbs, flowers, and 3 varieties of tomatoes. Emma was reading aloud from a book about forensic science, her current area of academic fascination, while Marcus prepared dinner in the kitchen. "Patricia," Emma said, looking up from her book, "do you think coincidences are real, or do you think things happen for reasons we don't understand yet?" It was the kind of philosophical question Emma had begun asking regularly, her developing intellect grappling with concepts of causation and meaning. Patricia considered her response carefully. "I think some things that seem like coincidences are actually the result of many small choices and circumstances that eventually lead to meaningful connections," she replied. "Like how your father's decision to help a stranger led to all of us becoming family." Emma nodded seriously. "So maybe coincidences are just patterns we can't see while they're happening, but they make sense when we look back at them later." "That's a very wise observation," Patricia agreed. "What made you think about that?" "I was thinking about how many things had to happen exactly right for us to become a family. Daddy's tire had to go flat in your parking garage, and my card to you had to not seem weird, and you had to be the kind of person who bakes too many cookies." Emma grinned. "It seems like too many perfect accidents to really be accidents." Patricia smiled, remembering her own sense that forces beyond coincidence had brought them together repeatedly when each of them needed connection most. "Maybe the universe has a way of bringing together people who are meant to take care of each other." "I like that idea," Emma declared. "It means we were always supposed to be family. We just had to find each other first." As they continued gardening in the golden evening light, Patricia reflected on the unexpected path that had led her to this moment. A declined credit card, a custody case, and a series of chance encounters had created a family bond that enriched all their lives in ways none of them could have anticipated. Emma's simple faith in the power of chosen connections had transformed Patricia's understanding of what family could mean. Love wasn't limited by traditional structures or professional boundaries. It grew where it was nurtured, creating its own legitimacy through consistency, care, and mutual commitment to each other's welfare. The little girl who had once asked if Patricia was lonely had solved that problem with characteristic directness, creating a chosen family that provided exactly what each of them needed. Marcus gained a trusted partner in parenting, Emma gained an additional source of love and support, and Patricia gained the family connection she hadn't realized she was missing. As Marcus called them in for dinner and they gathered around the small table that had become the center of their unconventional family life, Patricia felt a contentment she'd never experienced before. Sometimes the most meaningful relationships grew from the most unlikely circumstances, nurtured by small acts of kindness and sustained by the simple decision to keep choosing each other day after day. Emma had been right from the beginning. Helping each other did make people family, and love was indeed about how you decided to keep the people who mattered most. In saving Marcus from muggers that rainy October night, Patricia had unknowingly saved herself as well, opening the door to connections that would define the rest of her life. The custody case that had brought them together was now just paperwork in a file cabinet, but the family they'd chosen to create would endure long. After Emma grew up and started her own adventures, they'd proven that some of the most powerful bonds were forged not through law or biology, but through the simple human decision to care for each other across whatever boundaries society might construct. Up next, you've got 2 more standout Stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.